My name is Ruth, and I am 53 years old. I say my age with no shame, because every line on my face, every gray hair tucked neatly behind my ear, every ache in my bones has been earned. Life has not been gentle with me, but it has been honest, and that's something I can live with. What I struggle to live with, though, is the way the people I thought I raised with love and patience. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The people who once called me Mama with such sweetness could turn around and look at me as though I were just an obstacle standing in their way. But before I tell you about the betrayal, before I take you through the storm that nearly cost me my sanity, I need you to understand the house. That house wasn't just brick and mortar to me. It was my heart standing tall, even when my own body felt weak. My husband, Michael, built it with his own hands. He was the kind of man who believed that if you wanted something solid, something that could withstand both rain and gossip, both seasons and tempests, then you had to build it yourself. I remember the day we laid the first stone. He held my hand, kissed my forehead, and said, "Ruth, this house will keep you safe, even if I'm not here." Those words, they stayed with me. And when he passed away, far too soon, it was that house that kept me upright. Every window carried his fingerprints, every door held the echo of his laughter. The wooden beams above our heads still smelled faintly of the pine he cut down himself. The garden in the back was his pride, and in spring, when the roses bloomed, I swore I could still see him walking through them, humming an old gospel hymn. It wasn't just a house, it was him. It was us. It was the promise of forever, carved into wood and stone. But greed doesn't respect sentiment. Greed doesn't care about promises. Greed wears familiar faces and knocks on your door, pretending to be family. I remember the first time I felt it creeping in. It was after Sunday service, maybe a year after. Michael passed. My eldest, Leonard, had driven me home. He parked in the driveway, turned off the ignition, and didn't get out of the car. That was unusual for him. He was always the first to open the door for me, the first to kiss my cheek. "Mama," he said, his hand gripping the steering wheel, "this house is too big for you now. Don't you think it's time you thought about moving?" I laughed at first. A nervous, soft laugh because I thought he was joking. But when I turned to look at him, his eyes weren't joking. They were calculating. "It's too much for one person," he continued. "You could sell it, use the money to travel, to rest, to enjoy life." I remember tightening my fingers around the strap of my handbag. "Your father built this house for me, for us. It's not too much, it's just enough." Leonard sighed, shook his head, and said nothing more. But I knew that sigh. It wasn't disappointment in my health or my well-being. It was frustration, like I was standing in the way of something he wanted. Later that evening, I called Auntie Grace. She's not my blood aunt, but she might as well be. Grace has always been soft where life was hard, the kind of woman who can hold you with her voice alone. When she picked up the phone, I told her about Leonard's suggestion, and she went quiet for a moment. "Baby," she said finally, "sometimes children see dollar signs before they see love. You just hold your ground. Don't let anyone take what Michael gave you." Her words warmed me, but they also scared me. Because if Grace, who always gave people the benefit of the doubt, was warning me, then maybe I really did need to watch my step. And then there was Auntie Clara. Where Grace was warm, Clara was sharp. She didn't sugarcoat. She came to visit a week later, sat on my couch with her cane propped up beside her, and after hearing what Leonard said, she slapped her hand on the armrest. "Foolishness," she declared. "That boy doesn't see you, Ruth. He sees the land. Don't you dare sign nothing. I've seen it before, families circling like vultures over a body that ain't even cold yet. You guard that house." I tried to laugh it off. I told her Leonard was just concerned, just practical. But Clara's eyes cut through me. Practical is one thing. Greedy is another. Mark my words, Ruth, this is just the beginning. She was right. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice little things. My youngest daughter, Marie, who had always been carefree and bubbly, started bringing up future plans at family dinners. My middle child, Thomas, asked casual questions about property taxes and maintenance costs, questions he never cared about before. And each time they spoke, I felt the walls of my beloved home pressing in on me, like even they knew I was under siege. I remember one night sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the deed. Michael's handwriting was still there, his signature bold and sure. I traced my fingers over the ink, whispering to myself, "They can't take this from me. They just can't." But in the back of my mind, a little voice whispered, "What if they can?" I didn't sleep that night. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, the walls, the photographs. I thought of the Christmas mornings when Leonard would tear down the stairs 2 at a time. I thought of the nights when Marie would crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. I thought of Thomas, who used to build toy forts in the living room. Every corner of that house was a memory, and every memory was mine. And yet, my children, the very people who lived those memories with me, were the same ones eyeing the property like it was a prize to be won. That realization broke something inside me. When I told Grace, she cried. When I told Clara, she said, "I told you so." But me? I just sat in the quiet of my bedroom that night, staring out the window at the moonlit garden, and I asked Michael out loud, "Why did you leave me here to fight this alone?" Of course, there was no answer, just the soft rustle of the roses he planted. That was the first time I realized that love, even the deepest love, doesn't always protect you from the people you call family. Sometimes it blinds you to their intentions. Sometimes it makes you a target. And little did I know, Leonard's words were just the beginning. The real storm was still coming. But as I lay down in bed that night, tears soaking my pillow, I made myself a promise. If they wanted this house, they were going to have to fight me for it. And I was not going down easy. I have always believed that when people show you who they are, you ought to believe them the first time. But it's hard when the people showing you are your own flesh and blood. You tell yourself, "Oh, they didn't mean it that way," or "I must be overthinking." That's what I did with Leonard's words. I brushed them aside, tucked them into the corner of my mind where troubling thoughts go to rest. But they didn't rest, they grew. The next Sunday, after church, Marie came by with her 2 children. I set the table with fried chicken, collard greens, and biscuits, the kind of meal she grew up on. I thought maybe, if I filled her belly with memories, it would remind her of what home really meant. But in between bites of chicken, she asked me, "Mama, don't you get lonely in this big house?" I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "Lonely?" I repeated. "Yes," she said brightly, as though she were making casual conversation. It's a lot of space for one person. Don't you think you'd be happier somewhere smaller? A cozy apartment, maybe? Less work for you, less to worry about." Her words were wrapped in sugar, but I could taste the bitterness beneath. "I'm not lonely," I told her. "This house keeps me company. Every room has a memory. Every wall holds a story. I'd be lonelier in some apartment surrounded by strangers. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she smoothed it over with that sweet tone of hers. Of course, Mama. I was just thinking about what would make life easier for you. But I knew. I could see it in her eyes, the calculation, the curiosity, the hunger for something that wasn't hers. Later that evening, when the children had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with Auntie Grace. She was knitting, her fingers working quick and steady, while I poured my heart out. First Leonard, now Marie, I said. It's like they've all got the same idea in their heads. Grace clicked her tongue softly. They've been talking, she said. Mark my words, Ruth. They've been whispering to each other about that house. I leaned back against the sofa, feeling the weight of her words settle on my chest. But why? They grew up here. They know what this place means. Why would they? Because, Grace interrupted gently, when money and land enter the picture, memory doesn't matter, sentiment doesn't matter. People lose themselves chasing what they think they deserve. I didn't want to believe her, but deep down, I knew she was right. The following week, Thomas came by. Unlike his brother and sister, Thomas was quieter, more reserved. He was the one I always thought would protect me, but even he wasn't immune. He stood in the kitchen, looking over the stack of bills on the counter. Mama, the taxes on this place must be a lot, he said casually. They are manageable, I replied. But what happens when they aren't? He pressed. You're not getting any younger. If something happens, who's going to handle it all? I turned to him sharply. I will, as I always have. This is my home, Thomas. Not a burden. He raised his hands in surrender. I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just saying. Maybe you should think about the future. The future, that's what they all kept calling it. But to me, the future was this house, standing strong, long after I was gone. A place my grandchildren could run through just like their parents once did. I wanted to leave behind a legacy of love, not a pile of ashes picked over by greedy hands. That night, I called Auntie Clara. She didn't answer at first, so I left a message. My voice shook as I said, Clara, it's happening again. They're circling me like vultures. Call me when you can. She returned my call the next morning. Her voice was sharp as ever. Ruth, stop being soft. You hear me? You stop. They smell weakness, and they'll keep coming for you until you stand firm. I don't want to fight my own children, I whispered. You may not want to, she said bluntly, but you will have to. Better to fight standing than give in lying down. Her words cut me, but they also lit something in me. Because Clara was right, if I didn't draw a line now, I'd lose everything. A week later, we had a family dinner. Leonard, Marie, and Thomas all sat around my dining table, forks scraping plates, voices overlapping. At first, it felt normal, like the old days when Michael was alive and laughter filled the air. But then, as though rehearsed, the conversation shifted. Leonard leaned forward. Mama, we've been talking. I set my fork down slowly. Talking about what? Marie chimed in. About the house, about your future. My hands tightened into fists beneath the table. My future is just fine where it is. Thomas cleared his throat. We just think you'd be happier if you didn't have all this responsibility. You could sell the house, split the money, live comfortably. We could even help you find a new place. Their eyes were all on me, then three pairs of eyes that once looked to me for comfort, for guidance, for love. Now they looked at me like I was a roadblock. Enough, I said, my voice trembling but firm. This is my house. Your father built it for me, and I will not hear another word about selling it." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Finally, Leonard leaned back, a tight smile on his lips. "If that's how you feel, Mama." But I knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. After they left, I sat in the quiet dining room, staring at the empty plates. I thought of Michael again, of his promise that this house would keep me safe. But safe from what? Safe from the world or from the children we raised together? That night, Grace came over with tea. She held my hand across the table. "You're strong, Ruth," she said, "but you need to be prepared. They won't stop here." And I could feel it too. The whispers had begun, the subtle nudges, the carefully chosen words. They weren't asking anymore, they were planning. And I was about to learn just how far they were willing to go. I started noticing how often they showed up at my door, each of them finding an excuse to drop by. Marie would bring the children over, claiming they missed their grandmother, but before the night was done, she'd be in the kitchen asking questions about the bills. Leonard would swing by on his lunch break, pretending it was just to check in, but his eyes would scan the house like an appraiser, landing on the antique furniture, the hardwood floors, the chandelier Michael hung with his own two hands. Even Thomas, who had always been the quiet one, started to press. He came one evening with papers in his hand, brochures for retirement communities. "Mama," he said gently, as though speaking to a child, "I toured a place this afternoon. It's lovely. They take care of everything. You wouldn't have to worry about taxes, about upkeep, about—" "Stop right there," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I am not leaving my home." He frowned, his lips tightening. "I just don't understand why you'd want to stay here all alone. You'd be happier." "Don't tell me what would make me happy," I snapped. "You don't know." He didn't push further that night, but the seed had been planted. And seeds, when watered with greed, grow quickly. I tried to find comfort in Grace's company. She would sit with me in the evenings, knitting in the corner while I poured out my worries. "They don't see me anymore," I told her once. "They see this house, this land, and I feel like I'm fading in their eyes." Grace looked up from her knitting, her expression soft and sad. "You're not fading, Ruth. You're shining so bright it makes them jealous. They want to hold on to something that isn't theirs to claim." But Clara, oh, Clara, she had no softness about her. When I told her what Thomas had done, she slammed her cane on the floor. "I knew it," she barked. "Didn't I tell you? They'll come with papers, with sweet words, with all the tricks in the book. You better keep your wits about you, Ruth. And don't you sign a thing, not a thing." I nodded, but my heart was weary, because the pressure was only growing stronger. The next family dinner was the worst. I had roasted a chicken, baked sweet potatoes, set the table with the good china. I wanted so badly for things to feel normal, for us to laugh and share stories like we once did. But halfway through the meal, Leonard set down his fork and cleared his throat. "Mama, we need to talk seriously about this house." My stomach dropped. "Leonard, not at the table." "It's exactly at the table we should be talking," he said firmly. "We're family. We need to make decisions together." Marie nodded, her eyes wide and earnest. "We just want what's best for you, Mama." I clenched my napkin in my fist. "What's best for me is to stay right here, in my home." Thomas spoke up then, his tone calm but insistent. "But Mama, think about the future. Think about how much easier things could be. You wouldn't have to struggle. You could relax." "Relax?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Do you think this house is a burden to me?" This house is my joy, my safety, my memory. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room and see the life you built with the man you loved reflected in every corner? Do you? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Leonard leaned forward, his eyes cold. "Mama, you're being stubborn. You're not thinking clearly." That cut deep. Not thinking clearly. As if grief had rotted my mind, as if my love for my husband's legacy was insanity. I pushed back my chair and stood. "Dinner is over." They tried to protest, but I wouldn't hear it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I cleared the plates with trembling hands, my heart pounding in my chest. When they finally left, I locked the door behind them and pressed my back against it, tears streaming down my face. I felt like a stranger in my own family. That night, I walked through the house again, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. I whispered to Michael, "They don't understand. They don't see what you gave me. They don't see me." And for the first time since his passing, I felt a flicker of anger. Not at him, not at the house, but at my children. Because love, true love, is supposed to protect. But theirs had twisted into something else, something that pressed and pushed and prodded until I could hardly breathe. The pressure had begun, and I knew it wouldn't stop until something broke. By the time the next Sunday rolled around, I felt like I was living under siege. Every phone call, every visit, every family meal carried the same undertone: sell, move, give up the house. My children never came right out and said, "Mama, we want your inheritance now." But their words didn't have to be plain for me to hear the truth. I dreaded answering the phone. I dreaded the knock on the door. Even the sound of Marie's laughter, once a song that lifted my spirit, now made my stomach twist. Because I knew what would follow. Another casual conversation about my future. Another reminder that my home had turned into a battlefield. So when Clara called that Wednesday morning and told me she was coming over, I braced myself. Clara wasn't one for small talk. If she said she was coming, it was because she had something to say. She arrived with her cane tapping the front steps, her handbag swinging at her side, her eyes sharper than the winter wind. I opened the door, and before I could even greet her, she said, "Ruth, sit down. We're going to talk." I led her into the living room, where she lowered herself into her usual chair with a grunt. I poured her tea, added 2 sugar cubes just how she liked it, and sat across from her with my own cup. For a moment, she studied me in silence, her gaze heavy, unblinking. Finally, she said, "I hear the children have been circling again." I nodded, my throat tight. "They won't stop, Clara. Every time I see them, it's the same thing. The house, the future, my happiness. They talk like I don't know my own mind." Clara snorted. "Of course, they won't stop. You've got something they want. And once people set their eyes on something shiny, they don't rest until they get it. That's human nature. But family greed, that's the ugliest kind of all." Her words sent a chill through me. "But these are my children," I whispered. "I raised them better than this." Clara leaned forward, her cane resting against her knee. "Ruth, you can raise a child with all the love in the world, but once greed takes root, it don't matter. Don't you go blaming yourself. This isn't about your parenting, this is about their choices, and right now, they're choosing to circle you like buzzards." I pressed my fingers to my temples. "I don't know how much more I can take. I want to believe they love me, Clara. I want to believe they're just worried." "Worried?" Clara scoffed. "If they were worried, They'd be cutting your grass, fixing your porch, making sure you eat well. But no, they're worried about the property, not about you. There's a difference. I looked at her then, her lined face stern but kind beneath the harsh words. She was telling me what I already knew but was too afraid to admit. "What do I do?" I asked softly. "How do I fight my own children?" "You don't fight them," she said bluntly. "You outsmart them, you hold on to what's yours. And you make it clear, Ruth, make it plain, that you will not be bullied, tricked, or sweet-talked into giving up this house. You hear me? Not an inch." Her voice had the finality of a gavel, the kind of weight that settled deep into my bones. I thought of Grace, then sweet Grace, with her soft reassurances and gentle words. She told me to hold my ground too, but in a way that wrapped me in comfort. Clara, though Clara's words were steel, they cut, but they held me upright. "Your problem, Ruth," Clara continued, "is that you still see those babies in front of you. You see Leonard with scraped knees, Thomas building toy cars, Marie clutching her doll. But they ain't those children anymore. They're grown adults with grown appetites. And if you don't see them as they are now, you'll lose everything." I swallowed hard, her words sinking in like bitter medicine. The clock ticked between us. Outside, the wind rustled through Michael's roses. For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I said, "What if they turn on me, Clara? What if I lose them completely?" Clara set her teacup down with a firm clink. "Better to lose them than lose yourself. Better to be alone in your house than betrayed under your own roof." Her words landed heavy in my chest, but they were true. That night, long after Clara had left, I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, staring out the window at the moonlit garden. Michael's roses swayed gently in the wind, their petals glowing silver. I thought of his promise again, that the house would keep me safe. But safety isn't just about walls and roofs. It's about knowing you can trust the people inside them. And right now, I couldn't trust my own children. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered into the night, "What am I supposed to do, Michael? How do I protect myself without losing them?" Of course the roses didn't answer. But Clara's words echoed in my mind, "Better to lose them than lose yourself." It was the first time I admitted to myself that this fight wasn't just about a house. It was about my dignity, my identity, my very place in the world. And if my children wanted to test me, they were about to find out that I wasn't as weak as they thought. I should have known it was coming. Clara's words had been a warning, sharp as glass, and I carried them with me like a shield. Still, even a shield can't keep the heart from breaking when the first arrow flies. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, kneading bread the way Mama taught me, when the phone rang. My hands were covered in flour, so I wiped them on my apron and picked up. It was Leonard. "Ma," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth, the way he always talked when he wanted something. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm well enough," I answered cautiously. "Just baking some bread. Why do you ask?" He chuckled. "Always keeping busy, huh? That's good. You need to keep your strength up. Say, I've been meaning to talk to you about something important. Do you have a minute?" My stomach sank. I knew what was coming. Still, I said yes. "Well, I've been thinking," Leonard began. "You know the house is a lot for you to manage on your own. All that maintenance, the yard, the bills. It must be overwhelming. And I worry about you, Ma. Really, I do." His words were honey, but underneath I could hear the hum of greed. "I manage fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, But wouldn't it be easier if you didn't have to? Listen, I spoke with a realtor friend of mine. He said your house could fetch a great price in this market. You could move into one of those senior communities. Nice, safe, plenty of friends your age. Doesn't that sound good? I gripped the phone tighter. Leonard, I've told you before. I don't want to leave my home. There was a pause. Then his tone hardened, just slightly. I know you think that now, Ma. But what if something happens? What if you fall? What if you can't keep up? Don't you think it's better to decide on your terms rather than wait until it's too late? Anger rose in me, hot and fierce. This is my decision, Leonard, my house, my life. He sighed, and I could hear the impatience in it. Fine, Ma. We'll talk later. But just think about it, okay? I only want what's best for you. When I hung up, I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling. I wanted to believe him that he was only thinking of me, but Clara's words echoed in my mind. They're worried about the property, not about you. I tried to push the conversation aside, to focus on the bread. But the dough wouldn't rise right, and the kitchen felt cold, even with the oven on. Something in me had shifted. That Sunday, the betrayal deepened. We were gathered for dinner, me, Leonard, Thomas, Marie, and their families. The air was thick with chatter and clinking silverware. Then Thomas cleared his throat. Ma, he said, glancing at his siblings, we've been talking. We think it would be smart if you let Leonard handle the finances for the house. You know, just to make sure everything is in order. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Handle my finances. Why would I need that? Because it's a lot, Ma. Thomas pressed. Property taxes, insurance, utilities. You could make a mistake, and we don't want you to get in trouble. Leonard's good with money. He can take that burden off your shoulders. Leonard leaned back in his chair, smug and silent, letting Thomas do the dirty work. Marie, bless her, looked uncomfortable, but she didn't speak up. I set my fork down slowly. I appreciate your concern, but I am not handing over control of my finances. I've managed this house for decades. I can keep managing it. There was a beat of silence. Then Leonard said lightly, We just don't want you to lose everything, Ma. You've worked so hard. Don't you think it's better to let us help? I looked at each of them, my children, my flesh and blood, and for the first time I saw not love in their eyes, but calculation. A hunger they weren't even trying to hide anymore. Clara's voice rang in my head again. Don't you go blaming yourself. This isn't about your parenting. This is about their choices. I forced a smile, but my heart was cracking. Dinner's getting cold, I said, changing the subject. But deep down, I knew something had been broken that night. Trust. The bond between mother and child. And though I wouldn't admit it out loud yet, I also knew this was only the beginning. The first betrayal had come, the next ones would follow. Because once greed takes hold, it doesn't let go. Not until it consumes everything. By the time the betrayal had sunk in, I noticed the silence more than the words. You see, when family schemes against you, it's not just the things they say aloud, it's the things they don't say. The glances they exchange when they think you're not looking, the quiet phone calls in the next room. I became attuned to it. Every gathering felt staged, like they had already decided on the script before I walked into the room. Leonard would soften his tone, Thomas would push practicality, and Marie, sweet Marie, would smile too much, as though her kindness could cover the sharp edges of her brother's words. One evening, I walked into the dining room and caught Thomas lowering his voice on the phone. He didn't see me at first. He was saying, If Ma signs the power of attorney, we can move forward without her knowing the details. Leonard can handle the realtor. It's better to act now before she changes her mind. My breath caught. I stepped into the room, and Thomas nearly dropped the phone. "Who was that?" I asked. He stammered. Just a friend. We were talking about work." I looked him in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't see my boy. I saw a man cornered, caught, and lying through his teeth. Later that night, I called Grace. My voice trembled as I told her what I'd overheard. "Oh, Ruth," she said softly. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this. They're not just circling anymore, they're planning. You need to protect yourself." Her words felt like both comfort and condemnation. Protect myself from my own children? The very next week, I felt the whispers closing in tighter. At church, a neighbor leaned in and asked, "Is it true you're selling your house? I heard Leonard's already in touch with a buyer." My face burned. "That's not true," I said quickly. "I've made no such decision." But inside, I was shaken. If the neighbors had already heard, it meant the story had traveled. And stories like that don't spread without intent. My own children were planting seeds in the community, weaving their narrative so that, when the time came, no one would be surprised to see me gone. That evening, I visited Clara. She sat on her porch, rocking chair creaking, Kane resting at her side. "They're spreading rumors now," I told her, bitterness rising in my throat. Clara gave me a long, hard look. "Then it's war, Ruth. They've moved from persuasion to propaganda, and you'd better get your defenses in order, because once a rumor takes root, it's harder to kill than crabgrass." I sat beside her, the night air heavy around us. "How do I fight back?" "You fight back by standing firm," Clara said. "And by making sure your truth is louder than their lies. Don't let them write your story before you've had the chance to live it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I still had the strength to make my voice heard. But as I walked home that night, every shadow felt like a whisper, every rustling leaf like a reminder that betrayal was no longer a possibility. It was here, alive and growing, in the very family I once trusted most. And I knew then, the fight for my house had become the fight for my dignity, for my very name. When the weight of whispers grew too heavy, I found myself on Grace's doorstep. She opened the door before I could even knock, as though she had been expecting me. Her eyes, soft and knowing, scanned my face and read every unspoken word. "Come in, Ruth," she said, pulling me into her kitchen where the kettle was already steaming. "You look worn down to the bone." I sank into a chair, clutching my hands in my lap. "Grace, they're closing in. It's like a storm brewing, and I don't know if I have the strength to stand against it. Thomas, Leonard, even Marie's quietness feels like consent." Grace poured the tea, the gentle clink of china soothing in its familiarity. "You're not alone, Ruth. Not as long as I have breath in me." I swallowed hard, the tears pressing behind my eyes. "But what good is that, Grace? They're my children, my own blood, and they look at me as though I'm nothing but a title deed walking around in an apron." She reached across the table and laid her hand on mine. "Listen to me. You are more than a house. You are the woman who raised them, the woman who held this family together when your husband passed. If they've forgotten that, then shame on them. But you must remember it, because that's where your strength lies." Her words cracked. Something in me. I began to sob, quietly at first, then harder, until my shoulders shook. Grace just sat with me, letting the storm pour out. When I finally caught my breath, she leaned closer. You can't just sit and wait for them to take everything, Ruth. You need to act. Talk to a lawyer, secure your rights, make your intentions known. Don't let them twist the story into theirs. The thought of involving lawyers made my stomach twist. Wouldn't that make it worse? Wouldn't it make them angrier? Grace's eyes flashed. Angrier than scheming behind your back? Angrier than lying to the neighbors? Ruth, they're already betraying you. The only thing worse is doing nothing. Her bluntness stung, but I knew she was right. I nodded, wiping my face with the back of my hand. I'll think about it. No, Ruth, she said firmly. Don't just think, do, tomorrow. That night, back in my empty house, I lay awake listening to the old pipes groan, the creak of the floorboards, the steady ticking of the clock. This house had carried every laugh, every argument, every milestone of my life. And now my own children wanted to strip it from me. Grace's words echoed in the dark. Don't just think, do. And for the first time, I began to wonder if protecting myself meant protecting the house from them. It was Clara I turned to next, though I knew her words would not be wrapped in the softness that Grace offered. Clara had always been the sharper blade, the one who cut through excuses and laid the truth bare. When I arrived at her porch, she was already outside, rocking in her chair as if she had been waiting. Her cane rested beside her, and her eyes narrowed the moment they saw me. "You've been crying," she said without preamble. "Grace has been at you, hasn't she?" I sank into the chair opposite her. "She thinks I need a lawyer." "And she's right," Clara snapped, rocking harder. "Do you think those children of yours are waiting politely? They're sharpening their knives while you're sitting here, wringing your hands." Her bluntness made me flinch. "But they're my children, Clara. I can't." "Can't what? Face the truth?" "You've coddled them long enough, Ruth. You gave them love, a roof over their heads, everything you could. And now they see you as an obstacle, not a mother. If you don't protect yourself, they'll strip you down to nothing but memories." Her words sliced through the last of my denial. I looked out at the road, watching dust swirl in the afternoon Sunday. "I overheard Thomas," I admitted. "He was talking about power of attorney, about moving forward without me." Clara stopped rocking. "There it is, the knife, plain as day. They mean to gut you of your rights and call it love. If you sign that paper, Ruth, you'll be nothing more than a guest in your own life." The weight of her warning pressed into me. I wanted to argue, to soften the edges, but deep down, I knew she was right. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "You fight," Clara said firmly. "You fight with every scrap of strength left in you. You speak to someone who knows the law, someone who can bind your words in ink so tight no child can twist them. And if they call you stubborn, if they call you ungrateful, let them. Better to be called names than to be called a fool when the roof over your head no longer belongs to you." I left her house that evening with my heart heavy but my resolve beginning to take shape. Grace had given me comfort, but Clara had given me fire. Between them, I began to see the outline of a path forward. And for the first time since the betrayal began, I felt the faintest flicker of something I thought I had lost: hope. It took me 3 sleepless nights before I found the courage to act. Grace's kindness had steadied me, and Clara's sharp words had lit the fire, but the step itself, the act of walking into a lawyer's office, felt heavier than anything I had done in years. On the morning I finally went, the sky was gray and threatening rain. I wore my best coat, the one Daniel bought me on our 20th anniversary, as though it could give me the strength I lacked. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I drove into town, every mile filled with memories of the children I was about to stand against. The office was a narrow brick building with gold lettering on the window, Henderson and Cole, attorneys at law. My heart pounded as I opened the door. A young woman at the desk smiled brightly. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" I hesitated, then said, "No, but I need to speak to someone about protecting my home." Her smile softened. "Of course. Let me see if Mr. Cole is available." A few minutes later, I was ushered into a modest office where a man in his 40s rose to greet me. "Mrs. Whitman? I'm David Cole. Please, sit down." I lowered myself into the chair, clutching my purse as though it might anchor me. "Mr. Cole," I began, my voice shaking. "I need help. My children, they're trying to take my house from me." He leaned forward, his expression attentive but calm. "Tell me everything." And so I did. The phone calls, the whispered conversations, the rumors in town. The talk of power of attorney, the pressure to sell, the way my own sons looked at me as though I were already gone. By the time I finished, tears had slipped down my cheeks. "Mr. Cole handed me a tissue and spoke gently. "You're not the first mother to sit in that chair and tell me this story, and you won't be the last, but you came here in time. That's what matters." "In time?" I asked. He nodded. "If you'd signed a power of attorney, they could already be making decisions without you. But since you haven't, you still hold all the authority. We can put safeguards in place: your will, your property rights, even directives that ensure your wishes are respected." The words were both a balm and a knife. A balm because I wasn't powerless. A knife because he confirmed what I already feared. My children's intentions were not in my imagination. "What do I need to do?" I whispered. "We'll start with documentation," he said. "We'll draft a will that clearly states your wishes, and we'll put legal protections around the property so no transfer can occur without your explicit consent. It will make things harder for anyone who tries to act against you." Harder, not impossible. The distinction wasn't lost on me, but it was something. When I left the office, rain had begun to fall, steady and cleansing. I stood on the sidewalk, coat pulled tight around me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of control return. Clara had been right. Grace had been right. This was a battle, and I had just armed myself. But as I drove home through the wet streets, another thought gnawed at me. Once my children found out what I'd done, the storm would break in full. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to weather it. The drive home after meeting Mr. Cole was unlike any I'd ever taken. The rain blurred the road ahead, but it was my thoughts that felt cloudiest. I had taken the first step, yes, but it was only the beginning. Now came the papers, the signatures, the promises bound in ink. The next week, I returned to his office. This time, my hands did not tremble as much when I walked through the door. Mr. Cole greeted me warmly, and before me he laid a neat stack of documents. "These are the safeguards we discussed," he explained. "Once signed, they'll make it significantly harder for anyone to challenge your rights or act without your direct consent." I looked at the papers, their crisp edges glowing under the office lamp. They were both shield and sword, and yet, in that moment, they felt heavier than stone. Mr. Cole spoke gently, as if sensing my hesitation. "Mrs. Whitman, I know. This feels like turning your back on your children, but what you're really doing is protecting your voice. You're making sure your wishes are honored, no matter what pressures come." I thought of Leonard's smooth voice, of Thomas's practical tone, of Marie's silence. I thought of Grace's comfort and Clara's fire. Then I picked up the pen. With every signature, I felt something inside me shift pain, yes, but also a strange relief. It was as though each stroke of the pen stitched back a piece of the dignity my children had tried to unravel. When it was done, Mr. Cole gathered the papers with a nod. "You've just taken back control," he said. "If they try anything now, they'll face the law as well as your will." I managed a small smile, though my heart ached. "Thank you. Truly." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the smell of fresh bread filling the air, and thought about what I had done. The house seemed to breathe with me, its old walls whispering reassurance. Yet I also knew once Leonard and Thomas discovered the truth, their anger would burn hotter than ever. Later that night, Grace stopped by. She took one look at me and asked, "You did it, didn't you?" I nodded. "The papers are signed, the house is protected." Her eyes softened, and she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm proud of you, Ruth. You stood up for yourself. That takes courage." But Clara, when I told her the next day, only pursed her lips. "Good. But don't think the battle's won. Now you've drawn your line, they'll come at you harder. Be ready." Her words rang true. Signing papers was only the first defense. The storm was still gathering. And soon enough, my children would know they no longer held the power they thought they did. And when that moment came, I would have to face them not as a mother begging for love, but as a woman standing for her own survival. It didn't take long for the news to reach them. Papers might be quiet things, stacked neatly in an office drawer, but the ripples they cause can thunder louder than any storm. Leonard was the first to arrive at my door. He didn't bother knocking gently, he banged, sharp and impatient. When I opened it, his smile was gone. His eyes, once full of charm, burned with something darker. "Ma," he said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "Why didn't you tell us you went to a lawyer?" I steadied myself against the arm of the sofa. "Because it was my choice, my right." Thomas came in behind him, his jaw tight. "You don't understand what you've done. You've made things harder for everyone. For everyone or for you?" I asked quietly. Leonard's face hardened. "We're your children. We should be the ones looking after you, making decisions for you. And instead, you've put strangers in charge." "Strangers?" My voice rose. "A lawyer who protects my wishes is less of a stranger to me than sons who scheme behind my back." The room crackled with tension. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas said, more coldly than I had ever heard him, "So that's how it is, you don't trust us." I wanted to cry, to beg them to see reason, but something inside me had changed. Clara's fire, Grace's comfort, Mr. Cole's steady words, they had stitched together a new strength. "I love you," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "But love does not mean blind obedience. This house is mine, my life is mine, and I will not be bullied out of it." Leonard's eyes flashed. "You'll regret this, Ma." Thomas pulled at his sleeve, muttering, "Let's go." But not before shooting me a look that chilled me to the bone, a look that said this wasn't over. When the door slammed behind them, the house shook with silence. My heart pounded, and I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. Later that evening, Grace called. She must have sensed the storm in my voice. "They came, didn't they?" "Yes," I whispered, "and?" "They're angry. More angry than I've ever seen them." Grace sighed. "That anger means you hit the mark, Ruth. They can't control you anymore, so they'll thrash. But remember, thrashing is what the drowning do. Don't let them pull you under." And then Clara, when I told her, only smirked. "Good. Let them rage. Wolves show their teeth when they've been denied a meal. I sat alone after those calls, the night pressing against the windows. My house had never felt more like a fortress, and yet I'd never felt lonelier inside it. But even in that loneliness, I knew one thing with certainty: the battle lines were drawn. And from now on, every step would be war. The courthouse loomed like a gray monument to justice and compromise, its tall columns weathered by time but still carrying an austere dignity. I had walked past it countless times before, never truly noticing its details, but that morning, every shadow and crack seemed to carry meaning. The steps felt heavier beneath my feet, as though they were testing me, asking if I was ready for the weight of what was about to happen. Inside, the air was cool, almost too cold, carrying the sterile smell of polished wood and old books, the hum of voices mixed with the squeak of shoes on tiled floors. Reporters lingered near the entrance, like moths drawn to flame, their notebooks ready, cameras occasionally flashing. This case had become something larger than just me. It was a story about property, greed, and the everyday citizen fighting against a system that often seemed untouchable. I was guided to a bench near the front. My lawyer, Elena, whispered reminders. Speak only when asked. Keep calm. Trust the truth. Her voice was steady, but I could feel the undercurrent of nerves beneath it. She had been preparing for weeks, combing through every detail, every paper, every clause. When the judge entered, the room hushed as though the very air had been pulled out. He was a stern man, silver-haired, glasses perched low on his nose. His gavel struck wood with a sound that jolted me awake from my haze. The prosecution spoke first. They painted me as careless, negligent with documents, someone who didn't deserve to hold on to property of value because I hadn't protected it properly. They used words like irresponsible and reckless, twisting the truth into a sharp blade meant to cut me down. Each time they spoke my name, I felt it echo like an accusation. Then Elena rose. She was small compared to the towering prosecutor, but her voice carried a steel edge. She reminded the court of the forged signatures, the intimidation, the attempts at coercion. She called their bluff with calm precision, laying out the timeline piece by piece like a puzzle snapping into place. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. I stood, palms damp, the weight of every gaze pressing on me. I told them about my family, about the history of the house, about how it wasn't just property but the heart of generations. I explained the threats, the late-night calls, the strangers who appeared out of nowhere to unsettle me. I admitted my mistakes. Yes, I had trusted too easily. Yes, I had believed people were better than they proved to be. But I hadn't been careless, I had been targeted. The room was silent when I finished. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as though listening not only to my words but to what lay beneath them, the raw truth that no document could fully capture. Witnesses followed. Some supported me. Others, clearly pressured or bribed, wavered and contradicted themselves. At times, anger bubbled up in me, but Elena's hand on my arm kept me grounded. Trust the truth, she had said. I clung to that. By the afternoon, fatigue set in. The repetition of legal language, the shuffle of papers, the constant push and pull between two sides, it felt endless. But through it all, a quiet strength grew in me. For the first time, I wasn't running, hiding, or fearing what they might do. I was facing them in the open, in a room where their power was no longer unchecked. When the session ended, the judge announced that proceedings would continue the next day. His voice was neutral, but I saw something in his eyes: curiosity, maybe even doubt toward the prosecution's narrative. As I left the courthouse, reporters surged forward with questions. Microphones pushed close, cameras clicked, voices overlapped. I said nothing, only walked forward with Elena shielding me. My silence was stronger than any headline they could write. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer the fear of losing everything, but the fear of what would happen next, of whether the truth would be enough, in a world where lies often had louder voices. Still, I whispered to myself, we've come this far, we'll go further. The trial had begun, and so had the true test of endurance. The morning of the verdict felt unlike any other. I woke before dawn, the sky still veiled in darkness, the air heavy with silence. For weeks, every moment of my life had been bent toward this point. My house, my name. My very sense of belonging rested on the decision of strangers who had sifted through lies and truth, searching for clarity in a storm. I dressed slowly, deliberately, choosing plain clothes, nothing loud, nothing defiant. Elena had advised me to let my honesty, not my appearance, speak for me. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. I had aged years in mere months, lines carved by sleepless nights, eyes dulled yet sharpened with resolve. The courthouse steps were crowded again, more so than ever. News vans lined the street, cameras hungrily snapping at anyone tied to the case. Whispers rippled through the gathered crowd as I passed, some sympathetic, others skeptical. I kept my head high, not out of arrogance but out of necessity. I could not falter now. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. The judge's bench seemed taller, the flags behind him brighter, the seal of justice more daunting. We all rose as he entered, the gavel's strike reverberating through my bones. The jury filed in next, each face unreadable, a wall of composure masking the weight of the decision they carried. The clerk called for order. My chest tightened, my palms grew damp despite the cool air. Elena whispered a single word, steady. The foreman stood, a folded paper in his hand. The silence stretched unbearably, every cough, every shuffle magnified into thunder. In the case of, the words began, slow and deliberate, like stones dropping into still water. Time warped, my heart raced ahead while the world around me dragged. And then, the words I had prayed for, feared I would never hear, we find in favor of the defendant. For a heartbeat, I could not process it. The words floated in the air, unreal, like a dream I would soon wake from. Then they sank in. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, surged through me. My knees almost buckled. Elena's hand caught mine, gripping hard, her own face alight with exhausted triumph. Gasps rippled across the room. Some cheered quietly, others muttered in disapproval. The prosecution stiffened, their faces frozen masks of defeat. The judge nodded firmly, hammering the gavel once more to restore order. His voice was even, but I thought I saw a flicker of something human in his eyes, acknowledgement, perhaps, that justice had, for once, leaned toward the truth. When it was over, I rose slowly, as though afraid the floor would vanish beneath me. People reached out, strangers, offering hands, whispers of "you did it" and "justice." But I barely heard them. My ears rang with the echo of the verdict, the sound that had changed everything. Outside, the cameras exploded in light. Questions shouted from every direction. If you feel? What's next for you? Do you think this sets a precedent? I said nothing. Words felt too fragile, too small. I simply walked, the crowd parting reluctantly around me, Elena at my side like a shield. That evening, back at my house, I stood in the doorway for a long time. The walls seemed to breathe again, no longer trembling under threat. The old floorboards creaked in welcome, the familiar scent of wood and earth wrapping around me like an embrace. It was mine, not because a piece of paper said so, but because justice had recognized what was always true. Yet even in victory, a shadow lingered. I knew the fight was not over. Those who had tried to take my home would not simply vanish. Greed rarely surrenders quietly. The verdict was a shield, but not a fortress. I would need to remain vigilant. Still, as night fell and I lit a single lamp in the front room, I allowed myself something I had not felt in months: peace. I sat by the window, watching the quiet street, and whispered softly into the dark, "We made it." The battle for my house had been won, but the war for my future was only beginning. Victory has a taste, but it is not always sweet. Mine was edged with bitterness, for even as I stood within the safety of my home, I knew envy and resentment were gathering outside like storm clouds, waiting for their moment. The weeks after the verdict were strange. Neighbors stopped by with pies, casseroles, and words of relief. "We're glad justice was done, Ruth," they would say. Some hugged me tightly, as though they had been defending the house alongside me. Their kindness warmed me, but it also unsettled me, because I knew kindness is often fleeting, and family betrayal has a way of tainting even the purest gestures. It wasn't long before the retaliation began. First came the phone calls. Unknown numbers that rang late at night, the line going dead when I answered. At first I thought it was a prank, but after the third, then the 10th, I knew it was deliberate. Someone wanted me to feel hunted in my own home. Then came the whispers in town. People I had known for decades now averted their eyes or crossed the street. Some muttered under their breath, words like selfish or greedy old woman. Lies had long legs, and my relatives had wasted no time spinning the story that I had stolen what was theirs. One afternoon, as I returned from the market, I found my fence defaced. The words "CX" were scrawled across it in red paint, dripping like blood. My hands shook as I traced the letters. They weren't just attacking my property, they were attacking my dignity. I called Auntie Grace that night, tears choking me. "Grace, they won't let it go," I whispered. "They lost, but they're making me pay for it in other ways." Her voice was soft but steady, like a lullaby against my trembling heart. "Let them try, Ruth. They've already shown the world their true colors. You must not bend now. A strong tree does not bow to every storm." Auntie Clara, however, had a sharper take when she heard of it. "Of course they'll lash out," she said bluntly. "Snakes bite hardest after their heads are pinned. You have to be ready, Ruth. You think a verdict makes them powerless? No. It only makes them desperate. Desperation is dangerous." And she was right. The retaliation escalated. One evening, I noticed a car parked across the street. It idled there for hours, its headlights off, its silhouette just visible in the gloom. When I finally stepped outside, it sped away, tires screeching. Another day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, only a single sentence scrawled across the page. "This isn't over." I felt a coldness spread through me as I held the paper. They wanted me afraid. They wanted me to crumble without stepping foot in a courtroom. And for a moment, I almost did. But then I thought of the house. I thought of every memory, every scrap of love stitched into its walls. And I thought of the jury, 12 strangers who had believed in my truth. I could not let fear undo what courage had won. I began documenting everything: the phone calls, the cars, the letters. Elena advised me to keep a record in case the harassment escalated to something the law could pursue. It's not just about protecting the house anymore, Ruth, she told me. It's about protecting you. They've shown they'll stoop low. You must stay higher, but vigilant. Still, nights were the hardest. Lying awake, the silence of the house pressed in on me. Every creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind rattling the windows became a whisper of threat. I prayed for strength, and I prayed for wisdom. One night, as I sat awake at the kitchen table, Auntie Clara joined me over tea. "You've been quiet," she said, studying me. "I'm tired of fighting shadows," I admitted. "At least in court, there were rules. Out here, it feels lawless." Her gaze softened, though her words carried steel. "Then you must make your own rules. They want fear to eat you alive. Don't give them the satisfaction. Fear is their weapon. Wisdom must be yours." And so, I began to rebuild not just my defenses, but my spirit. I fixed the fence myself, painting over the ugly word with fresh, clean strokes. I planted flowers along it, blooms that turned the scar into something bright. I changed my locks, installed lights that glowed through the night. Each step was a declaration: I will not yield. But deep inside, I knew Auntie Clara was right. The battle wasn't over. Retaliation was only the beginning, and though I had won my house back, I now faced a new question. How much of myself would I lose in defending it? Retaliation has many faces, but the most dangerous is when it stops lurking in the shadows and steps brazenly into daylight. By the time the summer heat thickened the air around the house, I knew the whispers and veiled threats were building towards something inevitable. It began one afternoon with a knock at my door. Not the polite kind, but a heavy, insistent pounding that rattled the frame. When I opened it, my cousin Daniel stood there, his face twisted with anger. "You think you've won," he spat before I could even greet him. "But this isn't finished, Ruth. That house was meant to be ours. You stole it." My hands tightened on the edge of the door. "Daniel, the court made its decision. The house was never yours to begin with. You know that." His eyes burned. "Courts can be bought. You've poisoned everyone against us. But you can't live here forever. You'll slip up. And when you do, we'll be waiting." I shut the door on him, my heart pounding. His words lingered long after his footsteps faded from the porch. For the first time, their anger had come face to face, no longer content with shadows. That night, Auntie Grace called after hearing about it. "Oh, Ruth," she said, her voice trembling. "They're like wild dogs backed into a corner. They'll lash out because they've lost what they thought was theirs. But you mustn't let their bitterness take root in your heart." Her words soothed me, but the unease did not leave. Auntie Clara's counsel, however, was sharper. "You should have had the police there the moment he raised his voice," Clara scolded when she visited the next day. "People like Daniel don't respect peace. They respect consequences. Don't wait until they come knocking harder." I knew she was right, but part of me resisted. I didn't want my home to become a fortress of fear. Yet, within a week, the breaking point arrived. It was just past midnight when I awoke to a crash outside. My heart leapt as I hurried to the window. There, in the faint glow of the streetlight, I saw two figures running shadows darting across my lawn, and on the side of the house, the window had been shattered, glass glittering like cruel stars on the ground. I froze, breath caught in my chest. For a long moment, the night was still, too still. Then I heard a voice, low and menacing, drifting from the dark. "She can't hold it forever." I dialed the police with trembling hands. When they arrived, the intruders were gone. Only the broken window remained, a wound carved into the skin of my home. The officers took my statement, their flashlights sweeping the yard. Could have been vandals, one suggested. But I knew better. This wasn't random, this was a message. In the following days, fear wrapped itself around me tighter than ever. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Every car that slowed near the house made my stomach twist. I felt like a prisoner in the very place I had fought so hard to keep. But then, something within me shifted. Perhaps it was anger, or perhaps it was the quiet steel that had carried me through the trial. I realized that if I let fear dictate my life, then they had already won. I gathered Auntie Grace and Auntie Clara around the kitchen table. The three of us sat together, the lamplight soft on their aging faces, the air heavy with unspoken worry. "I can't live like this," I said firmly. "This house means nothing if it becomes my cage. They want me to break. I won't give them that satisfaction." Grace reached for my hand. "So what will you do?" I looked between them, drawing strength from both their gazes. Grace's tender warmth, Clara's stern resolve. "I'll fight, not just in silence. I'll make it clear that this house isn't just defended by bricks and locks. It's defended by me, and I will not bend." Clara nodded approvingly. "That's the Ruth I know. They wanted you small, frightened. Instead, you'll rise taller. Let them choke on their own bitterness." Grace smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Just promise me one thing, dear. Promise me you won't let their hate change your heart. Houses can be rebuilt, but once bitterness takes root inside you, it's harder to mend." I promised her. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside, I realized the truth. The breaking point wasn't about the threats or the shattered glass. It was about me. Whether I would allow myself to break or whether I would become unbreakable. And in that moment, I chose. This house was mine, my life was mine. And no matter how they tried, I would not let them take either away. The night of the broken window left me shaken, but not shattered. I spent the following morning sweeping up the glass, each shard catching the light like tiny reminders of fragility. Yet, with every piece I dropped into the trash, I felt my resolve hardening. Enough was enough. For weeks I had endured whispers, late-night calls, threats carved into silence. I had prayed, hoped, waited for it to stop. But patience had only emboldened them. The time had come to act, not to cower. My first step was the police. I brought my journal of recorded phone calls, the letter that had hissed, "This isn't over," and the photos I had taken of the vandalism. The officer at the desk flipped through them with a furrowed brow. "You've done well documenting this," he said, tapping the pages. "This goes beyond nuisance, it's harassment. We'll increase patrols around your neighborhood, and I'll file a report for the damage." It wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. Next, I called Elena. She had stood by me through the trial, and I trusted her wisdom. "Elena," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "they've escalated. I'm afraid of what might come next." Her voice was calm, steady as stone. "You fought them once and won. You can do it again. But Ruth, this time it's not just about defending yourself legally, it's about reclaiming your life. Fear is their strongest weapon. If you don't counter it, they'll keep wielding it. What do you suggest?" I asked. She paused before replying. "Visibility. Shine a light on what they're doing. Fear thrives in shadows. If the community, the press, even the law see the truth, their power crumbles." Her words rang in my ears long after the call ended. And so, I decided to speak out. At the next town gathering, I stood before my neighbors, heart pounding. I told them everything: the calls, the defaced fence, the threats. My voice wavered, but I did not stop. Faces turned pale, then hardened with quiet fury. By the time I finished, silence hung heavy in the room. Finally, old Mr. Jacobs from down the road stood. "You shouldn't have to live like that, Ruth. None of us should. If they come for you, they'll come for others too." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. For the first time in months, I felt the weight shift, no longer just on my shoulders, but carried by many. The community rallied. Neighbors checked in more often, offered to keep watch, even helped reinforce my fence. A group of men installed cameras on my property, while the women from church brought food and sat with me in the evenings so I wouldn't feel alone. It wasn't just protection. It was a declaration. You will not isolate her. But of course, word spread, and my relatives did not take kindly to it. Daniel returned one afternoon, standing at the edge of my lawn, his face a mask of rage. "You think you've turned them all against us," he shouted. "You'll regret this, Ruth. You've embarrassed the family. You've made us enemies in our own town." I stepped onto the porch, my voice steady though my knees trembled. "I didn't make you enemies, Daniel. You did that when you tried to steal what was never yours. All I did was tell the truth." His fists clenched, but he did not step closer. Perhaps the sight of neighbors watching from across the street, arms folded, kept him at bay. Finally, he spat on the ground and stormed away. That night, I sat with Auntie Grace and Auntie Clara. "They'll never forgive you for standing tall," Grace whispered, worry clouding her eyes. Clara snorted. "Good, let them choke on their grudges. You've lit a fire, Ruth, and now they know you're not alone. That's power." And she was right. Taking action had changed the air around me. I no longer felt like a hunted woman, shrinking from every shadow. I was still afraid, of course I was, but now I had turned my fear into something sharper, something that pushed me forward instead of pulling me down. As I sat by the window that night, watching the streetlights cast their glow over the quiet road, I realized something important. The house wasn't just walls and a roof anymore. It was a battlefield, yes, but also a beacon. A place where truth had stood its ground against lies, where I had learned to reclaim not just bricks and wood, but my own voice. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, I felt prepared. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about living and living on my own terms. It was a battlefield. Not of guns or soldiers, but of courage against intimidation, of truth against deceit. And on this battlefield, I was no longer fighting alone. The following week, the patrol car that now passed by my house twice a night became a symbol of reassurance. The flashing lights in the distance were no longer warnings but promises that someone was watching, someone was listening. One evening, Officer Ramirez, the young patrolman assigned to my street, knocked on my door. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his smile polite but tinged with concern. "Anything unusual tonight?" "Not tonight," I replied, grateful for the calm. He tipped his cap. "We're keeping a log. If anything happens, no matter how small, call us. The more records we have, the stronger your case." Case. The word made my stomach turn, but it also steeled my resolve. If it came to that again, a courtroom, testimony, evidence, then so be it. I had survived it once. I could survive it again. Still, quiet nights gave me space to reflect, and reflection often stirred unease. I wondered what Daniel and the others were plotting in their silence. Because silence, I knew, was rarely peace. It was planning. One night, I dreamt of my house burning. Flames licked the walls, smoke choked the air, and in the distance, faceless figures laughed. I woke drenched in sweat, clutching the edge of my blanket. The next morning, I told Elena about it. "Dreams don't predict the future," she said gently, "but they do reveal the fears you bury. Ruth, you can't let those fears dictate your actions. Prepare, yes. Protect yourself, yes. But don't let them convince you you're already defeated." Her words were medicine. I poured my energy into preparation. I installed stronger locks, reinforced the doors, and even bought a dog, a sturdy German shepherd I named Justice. His presence alone filled the house with a new sense of safety. And yet, deep down, I knew the true battle wasn't about windows or fences or locks. It was about will. They wanted me broken, frightened into surrender. But the more they tried, the more I found myself sharpening into steel. The day came when I realized I no longer looked over my shoulder every time I walked to the mailbox. My steps grew firmer, my posture straighter. Neighbors nodded at me with respect rather than pity. The narrative had shifted. I was not a victim, they were the aggressors, exposed in the light of day. And that shift, more than anything else, scared my relatives. For control was slipping from their grasp. Late one evening, as I sat by the window with Justice at my feet, I whispered a promise to myself. "You wanted my house, but what you really wanted was my silence, my surrender. You'll get neither." The fight was far from over. But for the first time, I felt not just ready but eager to face what came next. When the summons finally arrived, it wasn't a surprise. It was a thin white envelope slipped under my door while I was brewing tea. The moment I saw the bold legal header on the front, my stomach dropped. They'd made their move. Daniel and two of my nieces were suing to have the transfer to Elena nullified, accusing me of fraudulent conveyance and undue influence. It was a cruel inversion of the truth, as if I were the manipulator rather than the woman being preyed upon. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the paper. The tea went cold. Justice pressed his head into my lap, sensing my tremor. In the quiet of that moment, the weight of years of family memories pressed on me: Christmases, birthdays, baby showers, and how they'd all curdled into this. I called Auntie Grace. She arrived within the hour, bringing homemade soup and a bag of apples like she always did. She read the papers slowly, lips pursed. "They're trying to scare you," she said finally. "This is a bluff wrapped in legal words." "It doesn't feel like a bluff," I whispered. "It feels like they're coming for me." She put her warm hand over mine. "Then we fight back, but we fight smart." Later Auntie Clara called. Her tone was brisk, almost cold, but I knew that was her armor. "You knew this was coming," she said. "You can't meet wolves with a sheep's heart. Call your lawyer first thing tomorrow. Don't speak to them. Don't let them twist your words." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I feel like I'm losing everything, Clara." "You're not losing," she said sharply. "They're showing who they really are. That's a gift, Ruth. You'll see." The next weeks were a blur of legal meetings. Elena and I sat side by side at a long mahogany table while our lawyer, Miss Patel, flipped through documents. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak it was with surgical precision. "They're going to paint a picture of you as an old woman manipulated by a younger outsider," she said. "We'll counter with evidence the pattern of harassment, the offers, the text messages. This will not be easy, but it is winnable." At night, I would sit at my desk and write down everything. Dates, times, incidents. The notebook filled with years of unspoken pain. Every entry a small reclaiming of my truth. One afternoon, Miss Patel came to my house to inspect the files herself. She walked the room slowly, noting the reinforced doors, the security cameras, the faint scratches on the back gate where someone had tried to pry it open. "Good," she murmured. "This shows a pattern of intimidation. Judges don't like intimidation." The day of the first hearing arrived. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and bleach. Daniel and my nieces sat across the aisle, whispering among themselves, their faces carefully arranged into expressions of concern. I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. These were the same faces I had fed at my table, the same voices that once called me auntie with affection. When my name was called, I stood. My hands shook, but my voice did not. "Miss," Patel guided me to the stand. "Tell the court in your own words why you transferred the property," she said gently. I took a breath and began. I spoke of the pressure, the harassment, the fear. I spoke of justice at my feet at night, of patrol cars passing by. I spoke of wanting peace. When Daniel's lawyer cross-examined me, his tone was mocking. "Mrs. Ruth, isn't it true that you were confused about your finances?" "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I've been keeping my own accounts since I was 16. Isn't it true that Elena manipulated you?" I smiled, though my heart pounded. "Elena saved me. She didn't manipulate me. You know that. Daniel knows that. Everyone here knows that." There was a murmur in the gallery. Outside, during a recess, Auntie Grace hugged me tightly. "You're doing beautifully," she whispered. "You're not just telling your story, you're showing them your backbone." And for the first time, I felt it too. My voice was shaking, yes, but it was steady enough to carry the truth. The hearing stretched into the evening. As we left the courthouse, Miss Patel turned to me. "They underestimated you," she said. "That was clear today, very clear." I looked at the sky above the courthouse, bruised with sunset. I thought of my house, my sanctuary, my history, and of the people who had tried to take it. "They wanted my house," I murmured, "but they'll never take my voice." And in that moment, with justice at my side and the night breeze on my face, I felt something shift. Not a victory yet, but a tide turning. The weeks dragged on like a slow-moving train. Every day seemed heavy with waiting for the next court date, waiting for another letter from Daniel's lawyer, waiting for whispers to spread in the neighborhood. I kept a kettle warm on the stove more often than not. Tea had become my shield. Some mornings, I'd sit on the porch with justice at my feet, the cup warm in my hands, and I'd wonder how it had come to this family turned enemy, blood turned poison. Auntie Grace would visit often. She'd hum little songs while helping me tend the garden, her voice soothing against the anxiety chewing at my chest. "When all this is over, Ruth," she said once, pulling weeds by the roses, "we'll plant something new, something strong. You'll see." Auntie Clara was less gentle, but just as present. She phoned me daily, her voice stern. "Don't you falter now. The wolves are circling because they sense weakness. Don't give it to them." I would laugh lightly, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You always think I'm stronger than I am." "You are," she'd reply flatly, "and you'll prove it." The final hearing was set for a gray Monday morning. Rain slicked the courthouse steps, umbrellas bobbing in the crowd. I wore my best navy dress, the one with tiny pearl buttons, and clutched a folder of my notes even though I knew Miss Patel had everything in order. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tension. Daniel sat stiffly, jaw clenched. My nieces avoided my gaze, their eyes cast down as if they weren't sure anymore whose side they were on. Elena squeezed my hand gently under the table, steadying me. The judge, a woman with calm gray eyes, entered and the room rose. When she began reading her decision, My ears rang with the sound of my own heartbeat. She spoke of evidence, of harassment, of a pattern of pressure that had been documented. She mentioned the security footage, the texts Daniel had carelessly sent, the testimonies of neighbors who'd heard shouting in my yard late at night. And then, like a bell cutting through fog, came the words, "The transfer of property stands. This court finds no evidence of fraud or undue influence. The claim is dismissed." For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then Elena squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt, and Auntie Grace's muffled sob reached my ears. Daniel leapt up, face red. "This isn't fair," he shouted, slamming a hand on the table. "She's old. She doesn't know what she's doing." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Sit down, Mr. Daniels, or you will be removed from this courtroom." The bailiffs shifted, ready, and Daniel sank back into his seat, seething. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not triumph, not gloating, just release, like a chain had been unhooked from around my neck. Outside, reporters were waiting. Word had gotten out, and cameras flashed. Elena held an umbrella over me, shielding me as we walked down the courthouse steps. A woman from the local paper asked, "Mrs. Ruth, do you feel justice was served?" I paused, meeting her eyes. "Justice isn't always about winning," I said, softly. "Sometimes it's about truth being seen." And today, it was seen. That night, we gathered in my living room, Auntie Grace, Auntie Clara, Elena, even Miss Paddle, who accepted a glass of wine for the first time since I'd known her. We toasted not just to the verdict, but to survival. Grace's eyes shone with tears. "I knew they couldn't break you," she said. Clara smirked. "Of course they couldn't. She's made of sterner stuff than all of them put together." I sat quietly for a while, listening to the hum of their voices, feeling the warmth of the room. And then I spoke, my words more to myself than anyone else. "They wanted my house," I said slowly, "but what they really wanted was my silence. Today proved I won't give them that." Justice barked once, as if in agreement, and laughter rippled through the room. But later, alone in my bed, I thought about Daniel's face in the courtroom, twisted with rage and disbelief. I knew this wasn't over. People like him don't accept defeat easily. The battle was won, yes, but the war of family, of inheritance, of blood and betrayal, that war still lingered like a storm just beyond the horizon. And I lay there, staring at the ceiling, whispering into the quiet, "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The morning after the verdict, I woke to an unfamiliar quiet. It wasn't the silence of dread I'd carried for months, but something softer, like the pause after a storm. For the first time in what felt like years, I slept without jolting awake to phantom knocks on the door or the echo of Daniel's threats in my head. Justice nudged me with his wet nose, tail wagging as though he too understood the shift. I brewed coffee instead of tea that morning, daring to change the ritual, daring to taste something bold again. But peace, as I learned quickly, doesn't arrive without its shadows. By midweek, the phone calls started. Daniel left messages on my machine, each more venomous than the last. "You think you've won? You'll regret this. Everyone will see what kind of woman you really are." His words curled like smoke through my house, bitter and choking. I refused to answer. Miss Patel had warned me, "Do not engage. Let every message be evidence." Still, the old ache of betrayal pressed against my ribs. These weren't the threats of strangers, they were the venom of blood, of family. That wound always cut deeper. My nieces, too, reached out in confusing bursts. One wrote a long email filled with apologies, claiming Daniel had pressured her into joining the lawsuit. Another avoided direct words but posted cryptic messages online about betrayal and money ruining everything. Auntie Grace read the email over my shoulder. She sighed, her voice heavy with both hope and caution. "Maybe she means it, Ruth. Maybe there's a piece of her that regrets." But Auntie Clara scoffed when she heard. "Regret after being caught isn't repentance. Don't let crocodile tears fool you." I sat between their voices, my heart torn. Part of me longed to believe in reconciliation, in the blood bond healing itself. Another part of me, the bruised and wiser part, knew that trust once broken is never mended the same. Life began to change in quieter ways too. Neighbors who once offered me tight smiles now came to my gate with genuine warmth. Mrs. Alonzo brought over banana bread, whispering, "We always knew you weren't the villain they tried to make you." The postman lingered on my porch, telling me how his wife followed the trial in the papers and rooted for me. It was strange, being seen not just as Ruth, the woman with the roses and the faithful dog, but Ruth, the fighter who had faced down her own family and stood unbroken. Yet, in the evenings, when the sun painted long shadows on the walls, loneliness crept in. I missed the simpler days, before lawsuits and betrayals, when family still meant laughter at my table. I wondered if I'd ever feel that again. Elena visited often, her presence steady. One evening, she found me staring at the deed to the house, my fingers tracing the embossed seal. "You don't have to look at that every night," she said gently, taking it from me. "I know," I replied. "But it reminds me, this is mine not because of what they tried to do, but because I chose to fight for it." She smiled. "Then maybe it's time to think of what comes next. Not just what you've kept, but what you'll build." Her words planted a seed in me. What comes next? So, I began small. I painted the front gate a fresh coat of green. I rearranged the living room, moving the heavy sofa so light could spill through the windows more freely. I even signed up for a community book club, something I'd never dared while living under the weight of fear. At our first meeting, I laughed so hard at a stranger's joke that tears ran down my cheeks. When I walked home under the streetlights, I realized it had been years since I laughed like that. But Daniel's shadow still lingered. Once, I caught him parked across the street, his face half hidden in the dark car. Justice barked until the neighbor's lights flicked on, and Daniel sped off. I reported it, and Miss Patel filed for a restraining order. The law was on my side now, and for the first time, I felt its weight like a shield rather than a burden. Still, at night, Auntie Clara's words echoed. "Wolves don't leave because you win one battle." And yet, Auntie Grace's softer voice was there too. "Storms don't last forever, Ruth. Sometimes, the sun waits just behind them." I lived in that tension between fear and hope, between broken ties and the fragile threads of new beginnings. And as the days passed, I realized something vital. They wanted my house, yes. But what I had reclaimed was larger. It was the right to live unafraid. And that, I thought, sitting on the porch one golden evening with justice curled at my feet, was worth more than any inheritance or lawsuit could ever take from me. I sit here tonight, in the same chair where this story began, watching the moonlight pool across my living room floor. Justice snores softly at my feet, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The roses outside my window are blooming again, their fragrance drifting in whenever the breeze stirs the curtains. It feels almost strange, after everything, to have calm. To feel the silence of my home without it echoing with dread. When I look back now, I realize the house was never just wood, concrete, and nails. It was a battleground, yes, but it was also a mirror reflecting who I was and who I had to become. They wanted my house. They thought it was about money, about inheritance, about property that could be divided, sold, consumed. But what they really wanted was control over me, over my voice, over my right to stand on my own ground. And when I signed it over to someone they never expected, Elena, my friend, my unexpected ally, I didn't just sign a piece of paper. I made a choice to stop being the victim they thought I would always be. I remember Auntie Grace sitting with me the night after the verdict, holding my hand as if I were still a little girl. She whispered, "You taught them something, Ruth. You taught them you can't be owned." Her tears fell onto my hand, warm and soft, and for the first time I believed her. Auntie Clara, in her stern way, gave me her version of the same lesson. "You burned the bridge they thought they could walk over forever. And good. Some bridges should burn." Her words were harsher, but I carried them too. Daniel still lingers on the edges of my thoughts sometimes. The look on his face in the courtroom, red with rage, eyes full of disbelief, I don't think I'll ever forget it. He truly believed he had a right to what was mine, simply because blood tied us. But blood isn't always family. I learned that. Sometimes, family comes in the form of neighbors who stand as witnesses when you're harassed. Sometimes, it's a lawyer who fights for you like you're her own mother. Sometimes it's an unexpected friend like Elena, who shows up not to take, but to protect. I lost pieces of my old family in this fight. The nieces who chose money over memory, the siblings who stayed silent when they should have spoken. Those losses sting, and maybe they always will. But I gained something else, something stronger. I gained a family I chose, a circle built not on obligation, but on love freely given. The house is still mine, yes. Its walls are sturdy, its roof holds firm. But what makes it precious is not its market value or its deed. It's the life lived within it, the laughter I hear again when my new book club gathers in the parlor, the scent of Grace's apple pie cooling on the counter, the sound of Clara's sharp tongue scolding me for letting weeds grow in the garden. It's the quiet evenings when I sit here, pen in hand, and write down pieces of my story, hoping that someday someone else might find strength in these words. And so, if you've listened this far, I want to leave you with the truth I carved out of all this pain. Your worth is not measured by what others think they can take from you. It is measured by what you refuse to let go of: your dignity, your peace, your voice. Houses can be stolen, money can be squandered, but your spirit is yours alone. Guard it fiercely. If family betrays you, it will cut deeper than anything else, but betrayal is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the painful beginning of freedom. I am Ruth. I am 53 years old. I have lost much, but I have gained more. They wanted my house, but what they never expected was that in trying to strip me of everything, they forced me to find myself again. And in the end, that was the inheritance worth keeping. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.